Josh Heupel goes to Dallas, and he goes pretty much everywhere that he has to when required to speak to the media. And he had been very strong in talking up his roster throughout the entire month of August. If you listened, he talked about it's his deepest roster that he's had. Jimmy Himes, who we have on and wrote a couple of columns on this, breaking down the offense and the defense, disagreed. Let me ask you specifically, Will, do you think Josh Heupel overtalked his roster? Because on Monday, he kind of backtracked a little bit, said, well, we don't really have a full roster. What do you think about the way he's approached this from a PR standpoint? Because he's hyped it up.
Yeah, no, he has. He has. You know what it reminds me of? That first year Tennessee did well under Barnes, and everybody was expecting them to finish, bottom half or somewhere middling in the SEC, and he was behind the scenes saying, "Oh no, we're good. We're going to be good." And then Grant Williams was an all SEC player, right? So it kind of reminds me of that a little bit. I think it depends on your output at the end of the day. If they're 8-4, yeah, you taught your roster up too much, and that's a lesson that he'll learn because Josh Heupel, he wasn't much of a talker when he got here, and he still isn't a guy that wants to talk, but he's at least proficient at it. But if you go 10-2, then a lot of this makes sense. I think he's happy with his roster. I think he likes his roster. I think for the first time in his career, he can play who he wants to, not who he has to, especially linebacker positions like that. They have depth at some places that he hasn't had in the past. But if you go 8-4 or 9-3, even some people are going to be like, wait a minute, I thought you were. Then I think we're going to look back at that and say, yeah, that was Josh Heupel, who's, not someone that's incredibly comfortable speaking publicly, kind of going a little too far in what he had to say about his team. But if he goes 10-2 or 11-1, none of us are going to say he was hyping up his roster too much.
Very true.
Okay. Yeah. So, Will, I agree overall, and I've been saying since the middle of 2022 that if you looked at Josh Heupel's trajectory, he was literally loading up for 2024 to be his magic year. But it was alarming to me in the press conference, and I wanted to know your thoughts, because after doing all this talking and everything, in his opening week Chattanooga press conference on Monday, he goes, quote, "We continue to build our roster, certainly. We're not quite at a full roster yet." And I'm sorry, but doesn't that throw you off that he said that after spending a whole offseason telling us how deep and talented this roster was?
I think there's nuance there, right? I don't have a problem necessarily with the nuance there. I'll be completely honest with you guys also. I don't believe a single word a coach says at a press conference. I've done enough of those press conferences that I'm aware that this is a waste of everyone's time. And it's sure, say what you want to. And also sometimes one thing that burned me years ago, David, I don't know, it was you and Adams that actually got me to kind of realize what was going on, was when Denarius Moore was at Tennessee and he was young. And Coach Fulmer kept talking about how great Denarius Moore was. And then that guy got on the field and didn't do a dang thing. And I think you and Adams one time in the control room before you guys did the show, after the one I was producing, kind of were like, okay, well, when a coach is talking about things like that, that coach is saying, this is how he's practicing. This is the trajectory he's on. It doesn't mean necessarily that guy's going to go catch 10 balls for 170 yards, 3 touchdowns that immediate week. So I do think part of it is what he's giving you his perspective. And I don't have a problem with the coach giving you his perspective. So his perspective is, man, we're in a much better spot. And, man, we have depth. And I'm not having to make Solon Page come out of the SID office to go play linebacker. Aaron Beasley, I'm not trying to rip Aaron Beasley. He never had the talent to play at an SEC level, right, physically. So he just was slow and kind of undersized. And so that guy played his backside off to be able to even get to the level that he got to. So I think both sides can be true. But again, if they go 8-4, Josh Heupel will learn a lesson here because there's a lot of fans who are going to pull those receipts off of YouTube, right?
Okay, well, let me ask you this. I know Caleb wants to jump in here. No matter what he said, and you're so right about press conferences, good gracious. No matter what he says, do you think this roster is more talented than 2022?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. At specific positions is a big portion of it. I think – look, I think point blank, and part of this is talking to a guy that was on those staffs, was on Heupel's staff and Pruitt's staff. They didn't have players, man. They just didn't have high-level players that were going to be able to compete with a Georgia, with an Alabama, without you having a decided schematic advantage. And so I think this roster, top to bottom, from a depth standpoint, is more talented. I think the places that it's more talented. I think that you have just as much talent at wide receivers you have ever had, and you probably have more depth. I think you have less talent at running back than 2022, but you have some high-level talent there. I think at quarterback, your talent is there, but you don't have Hendon Hooker's experience. The defensive side of the ball, defensive line, definitely. Linebacker, definitely. Defensive back, 50-50. I remember there were times that people in 2022, I was like, well, okay, what's wrong with your secondary? And people at UT are like, they're just not fast enough, man. Like, they're just not. These guys shouldn't have been in the SEC, and we got handed them, and they're not good enough to play at this level, and they probably need to be playing at UCF where we were before. And so, and I think that's part of it is now you have guys that actually have SEC speed. Suddenness is something that people like to say in the scouting world. You have guys that have that kind of thing where, as opposed to coached up and 3 stars that have gotten it done in the weight room, so now you're on the field performing at a pretty high level. But when you put them against the future NFL starters of Georgia and Alabama, good luck, right?
Who was the comedian You Can't Fix Stupid?
Oh, I don't even remember, but yeah, was that Ron White?
I think it might have been You Can't Fix Slow when it comes to defensive backs in the SEC.
Yeah, no, you can't. I mean, and I'll just say there a couple of those guys have transferred out, and a couple of those guys went on to the NFL. But there were times that I've been just asking people on the defensive staff, why this? Because he's slow. That's why. Well, then why not play the young guy? Because he didn't know how to cover anybody yet. He came straight from high school where he was a quarterback. Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, well, it's funny you bring that up because the way I looked at the secondary in 2022, I looked at most of those guys. I looked at it as they could have played in the SEC if they were surrounded by more elite talent, but they couldn't all together play in the SEC. Is the way I looked at it. It's like you could have one Robert Ory in your starting lineup, but if you have 5 Robert Orys, okay, you're not going to win anything.
No, I agree with you. And they were Arkansas, South Carolina level players. They weren't Georgia, Alabama level players. And so, and if you looked at where they were during the recruiting process, where did most of those guys, who did Tennessee compete with? Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas, South Carolina, Louisville. It was that level of player. Now, you could still get good players. Dylan Sampson was that, right? Dylan Sampson was a guy that the big-time schools weren't necessarily after, but those 7-5, 6-6 SEC schools were after, and that guy's a good player. But I agree with you. If you have 22 of those guys, that's probably not going to go particularly well for you to win at a high level anyway.
It's gold. Will, I appreciate it, buddy. 3-7, the sports animal there in Knoxville. I would highly encourage you follow him at Will West WNML. And just for the fun of it, can we see your dog?
Well, she's barking over in the corner right now, so I don't know that I can hunt her down. She's tearing up a pillow as we speak.
We've all been there. All right, buddy. I appreciate you. Have a blessed day and a great weekend. Enjoy football.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys.
See you, buddy.